Let's talk about 6 running backs who deserve way more attention in fantasy football drafts. And we'll start with the Chargers 6th round rookie Kamani Vidal, who they drafted. He's a running back out of Troy. Now, typically 6th round running backs out of smaller schools aren't really worth talking about in fantasy, but Vidal is because he landed in the ideal spot. And the dude actually has some quality skills. Wouldn't have been shocked if he went in like the 3rd or 4th round. You can see right here in 2023, he put up over 1,600 rushing yards, which would led all running backs in this past NFL draft. He added in his receiving yards. He had like almost 2,000 total yards. And the fella has the ideal size. He's 213 pounds and he ran a 4.46 40 time at the combine, which is solid. And now he lands on a Chargers team led by Jim Harbaugh that's set up to run the ball, and here's why it's the ideal spot. Well, for starters, this team is only improving their offensive line. You can see they take Joe Alt in the 1st round out of Notre Dame, the best offensive tackle that we've seen definitely in this draft, but also in quite some time. And you can go over to some of their free agency moves. They end up releasing veteran receiver Mike Williams, and if you remember, they ended up going out and trading Keenan Allen to the Bears for a 4th round pick. So these two moves right here, well, they're down their top 2 pass catchers and now have a better offensive line to run the ball with Joe Alt. And not to mention, they don't have Gerald Everett, their starting tight end anymore, or their elite pass catching running back, Austin Ekeler. So this team is completely void of pass catchers, which means they're probably going to lean on running the ball the way they've built this offseason and with their new coach. And the top running backs on this team are veterans who J.K. Dobbins is coming off of an injury, and Gus Edwards is now 29 years old, coming off of his worst season as a pro last year. And just to add even more context here, J.K. Dobbins only signed a 1-year deal with this team, and he only got $50,000 guaranteed, which is definitely a significant amount of money, but relative to other NFL players, normally this is like at least 500, 600,000 at like the very end. I've never seen it be this low, which means odds are like he could just be cut before even camp starts or the end of the season, whatever it might be. There's a decent chance they're just trying out to see what they can get in him off of that Achilles injury, which usually takes a full year to come back from, and he's not quite yet there. So all these reasons are why a 6th round pick in Vidal could actually get usage right away, and also he is a fantastic pass protector. So when I see on Underdog that he's currently going as the 160th overall player, the running back 49, and this is as early as he's going. Right now in your sleeper drafts, he's probably not being taken at all. He's probably going as like the running back 60, 65, 70, and that's just a mistake because there is some upside here. But in the fantasy blueprint, my rankings, which you can get down below right now, I'm actually 4 rounds higher on Kamani Vidal than where he's going on Underdog drafts. Now the next man up, we're going to talk about the Washington Commanders starting running back, and yes, I believe Brian Robinson is without a doubt their starting running back, and he has a ton of value right now. Look, here's the deal. He goes in the 9th round of Underdog drafts, even later in sleeper drafts, and I think that's a ton of value for any starting running back, especially one that has proven he can do it in the NFL. Now, last season, on a pretty bad offense in Washington, this guy goes out there and between his carries of 178 and his targets of 43, he's averaging almost 15 opportunities per game and finished as the running back 22, again, on a terrible offense last year. But now for some reason, he goes as the running back 34 in drafts way later, and look, one reason might be they signed another running back. And that running back has a big name and has put up massive running back 1 overall numbers for fantasy before, and Austin Ekeler, who gets a 2-year deal worth a little over $11 million, as you can see right here. However, Austin Ekeler is now aging. He's 29 years old, and as you can see right here, his 2-year deal only comes with $4.2 million guaranteed, which is about $2 million a year guaranteed, which doesn't say at all that he has to be guaranteed a starting role or even a significant role in the offense. And there were some things working against Ekeler last year. He lost his quarterback, the offensive line was banged up, he was banged up, but he still finished 62nd overall in rushing efficiency. And Brian Robinson succeeded last year despite having Antonio Gibson catch 48 balls in the backfield, so even if Ekeler does that or similar, he can still be, like he was last year, Brian Robinson, a top 25 back. Now, there are without a doubt a couple of concerns. The first one would be they have now a rookie quarterback under center in Jaden Daniels, and as much as this is a concern, you know, maybe he doesn't play as well, it drops a little bit. It could also be upside if he looks as good as he did in college with LSU. And now this could lead to less targets because Jaden Daniels is an elite, at least in college, rushing quarterback, but some people are saying, oh, it's going to hurt also the rushing yards for Brian Robinson, but I just don't agree. Because when you have a mobile quarterback, it leads to more deception and has to make linebackers hesitate. We've seen this in the past, just as recent as a year ago, Lamar Jackson and his running backs, and even Jalen Hurts with DeAndre Swift. And Robinson was legit good last season, ranking 7th in yards created per touch and 5th in running back yards per route run as a receiver. Now, one big concern is that the offensive line is a little bit suspect. It was suspect last year, but they did do some things in free agency. They added a guard from the Chiefs and Nick Allegretti, and then they also added Tyler Bidet as the center from the Dallas Cowboys, who's a veteran, who's a proven, battle-tested center from that Dallas offensive line. So we're hoping that this actually, makes the offensive line better because it is something that is suspect. So these two running backs we've talked about so far definitely deserve more attention, and this next guy is rising pretty quickly for me as well. And I have a feeling that this guy's going to be like a popular summer ad for a lot of different people, and it's Chase Brown, the Cincinnati Bengals running back right now, entering his 2nd season. He is a 10th round pick currently in fantasy. And here's the deal. He actually had a decent season production-wise as a rookie. On a limited sample, he ended up averaging 5.8 yards per touch. Now, I must point out, a lot of that came in the passing department, which is is great, but some of it on a smaller sample might not be consistent, these big plays that he broke off, because as a runner, he ranked just 47th in the NFL as a rusher, averaging 3.8 yards per carry, which isn't great overall. But again, he was a rookie behind a proven veteran in Joe Mixon who was seeing the workload. But we know based on his college production that Chase Brown can see a workhorse role, because in his final year of college in 2022, he averaged 27 carries a game and nearly 1,900 total yards. And Chase Brown now, with no Joe Mixon in Cincinnati, he's off to the Houston Texans. His biggest competition is the newcomer Zach Moss, a veteran running back who last year with the Colts for the first 3 or 4 games of the year was very good and quality until Jonathan Taylor got back from the PUP and fully got healthy to his workhorse role. Now, this contract for Zach Moss is nothing crazy. It's a 2-year deal with $3 million guaranteed, so $1.5 million on average each year guaranteed. Definitely doesn't mean that he's the workhorse starting running back for this team, but as the veteran coming in and had a quality year last year, I do think he'll at least start the year as the RB1. Now, Moss is a quality back, but he's not some type of elite athlete, explosive, dynamic runner or pass catcher, which Chase Brown in a small sample has shown that he could do, and also in college he showed those things. And when you look at the offensive line, it only got better in my opinion this offseason. They added the veteran piece in Trent Brown, a big signing for them, a 1-year deal I believe, so we'll see what could happen this year. And then they pick up in the first round an offensive lineman in Amarius Mims, known to be a really good run blocker in college out of Georgia, so this is somebody again who's going to improve an offensive line. That wasn't suspect last year, but now it's only going to get better. So again, I do think Zach Moss will be this team's RB1 to start the year, but if we're talking about running back 2s to bet on, I want to get the young, explosive guys who have shown workhorse usage in college in Chase Brown. And similar things can be said for this next guy, and that's Ty Chandler, the Minnesota Vikings running back who's entering his 3rd season. Because Chandler was very productive last year. His rookie year was kind of just axed out because of an injury, but last year he ended up seeing a larger workload, and he ends up averaging 5 yards per touch, top 20 in the NFL, even though you didn't really see a role until like week 10 because the team had Alexander Mattison and Cam Akers on the team. But over the final 8 games when Cam Akers was injured and Alexander Mattison wasn't producing, we saw Chandler have 4 top 30 finishes, including multiple games of 15 plus touches, including his best game of the year that came in week 15 against the Cincinnati Bengals, where with his rushing attempts of 23, his receptions, he had 26 touches, over 150 total yards, and he scores a touchdown. He looked like an absolute monster when he got the full workload. And the fella has 4.38 speed, so he's fast. He could break tackles and pick up yards after contact. And earlier this offseason, this backfield was looking like it was all Ty Chandler's. They were speaking highly of him, and they released Alexander Mattison. But then the unexpected happened because the Packers cut veteran running back Aaron Jones, and he ended up signing the next morning with their division rival, the Minnesota Vikings. And what does he do? He gets a 1-year deal, fully guaranteed for $7 million, which is actually basically the same amount of money the Packers were offering, but it wasn't a multi-year deal, so he said, screw you, I'm going to the competitor. And Aaron Jones, when healthy last year, was actually solid. He was averaging 5.2 yards per touch, and over the final 5 games had at least 110 plus yards in each game. But the truth is, he did miss 6 games with an injury last year that was nagging all season long, and he didn't really have any competition close to what Ty Chandler would give him this year. Because last year his competition was A.J. Dillon, who was ineffective and was injured, and then an undrafted player in Emmanuel Wilson, who was actually pushing A.J. Dillon at times. That's how bad Dillon was. There just wasn't any competition. They actually had to give Aaron Jones 20 plus touches a game towards the end of the year and the postseason because they just didn't trust anyone else. But as I mentioned, that's not going to be the case this year when Ty Chandler is out there. They're speaking glowingly of him. They trusted him last year to be the workhorse at times, ahead of Alexander Mattison, who they actually gave a contract to last year. So I think they're going to go with the young player. Not over Aaron Jones, but maybe close to a 50-50 split. And again, if we're betting on running back 2s who are going later in the draft, I think Chandler's going like round 13. Why not take the young, explosive, fast guys? Now, it seems counterproductive when I bring up this next a running back 2, even though I think it's a 1A, 1B, because he's not young. He's not all that explosive and he's not fast, but David Montgomery has his own attributes that make him very appealing. Because what if I told you this guy averaged 80 yards per game last year, had 13 touchdowns on the season, but he's still basically going exactly where he was drafted last year in drafts as like a 7th round pick. And no, that is not a joke. He's currently going as the running back 19, the 74th overall player on ADP, so the 7th round on underdog drafts. He's going like the 8th or 9th round on sleeper drafts that I'm seeing right now for mock drafts. I mean, this is far too late for a guy who was highly productive and a top 20 back a year ago. Because yes, I know Jahmyr Gibbs is there, and Jahmyr Gibbs is the exciting and better player for fantasy. I believe that he's a top 5 running back this year. Despite that, Montgomery still saw 14 plus touches in 10 of his 14 regular season games. And it wasn't just the regular season, because in the postseason, their last game of the year against the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship, he sees 15 carries, 2 receptions. Overall, between his rushing yards of 93, receiving yards of 20, he goes over 100 total yards and a touchdown. He was even productive and leaned on in that game. And I somewhat get why he's going a little bit later. He's not the flashy back. He's not the young back. He's not explosive. He's not an elite pass catcher, all the things that you want for fantasy. But at some point when he drops so far and he's going to see 10 plus touchdowns and 15 touches a game, yeah, he's appealing. Especially when you consider he's going into year 2 of this offense and the offensive line is still good. They re-signed Graham Glasgow, which was a huge pickup for them. And then they ended up getting a center in Kevin Zeitler to replace Jonah Jackson, who left. So once again, you're looking at like a top 5 offensive line. Frank Ragnar's still there. They re-signed Graham Glasgow. Penny Sewell's an all-pro. Ragnar, I should mention as well, as somebody who was an all-pro player and a Pro Bowl player. So this is an offensive line top 5 unit almost instantly. And they keep their offensive coordinator, which I've said so many times on this channel, and Ben Johnson, because it's that important since they went so far into the postseason, the final 4 teams. Other teams are just hiring their coaches, which means they got to keep their great offensive coordinator. And Kevin Zeitler, the new offensive lineman, the center that they added, I mean, he is as reliable as it comes. According to ESPN, Zeitler has played 92% of his team's snaps in his 12-year career. And I'll leave you with this. The Detroit Lions have now led the NFL in red zone carries and red zone production for their running backs in back-to-back years. We just saw 13 touchdowns last year from Montgomery. Expect quality numbers again. Now, before we keep going in this video, I want to let you know about the Fantasy Blueprint. I know it's early on in the summer. Maybe it's later by the time you're watching this, but this blueprint will help you win your fantasy league, and you just get it by following these 2 simple steps. We had over 1,000 people use it last year, and here's the thing. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs for whatever reason, this just becomes risk-free. Consider it a deposit. I'll refund that $10. All you have to do is ask if you don't make your fantasy playoffs. But again, 1,000 people signed up last year, and only 3 people reached out for a refund, which means most of the people made their fantasy playoffs, or they just enjoyed the product so much they didn't think that they needed a refund. Now, if you want to get your blueprint this year to smack around your competition, well, just scan the QR code on the screen, or you can click the link in the description below. There's just 2 simple steps, so just make sure you follow those, and then you can get your blueprint. Now, the next man I want to talk about is this guy right here, Devin Singletary. The former Bill and Houston Texan is now a New York Giant after signing a 3-year deal worth $16.5 million, and about close to $10 million of that is fully guaranteed, which is significant for the running back position. And he's now reunited with Brian Daboll, the Giants head coach, who was the former Bills coach. During his time, he spent 3 years with him from 2019 to 2021. And during that stretch of those 3 years, it was Devin Singletary who was basically the team's workhorse running back, 150 plus carries every year. When you factor in his rushing yards, you can see here, we scroll over to his receiving yards. He averaged over 1,000 total yards per year under Brian Daboll. And that context matters, that he was Brian Daboll's go-to guy, because Devin Singletary just had 246 carries last year, a career high, and he showed he can handle that workload and still be productive. And similar to David Montgomery, he's not this exciting player, but he's still a starting running back going far too late in drafts, and he's just reliable. Coaches trust him, he can pass protect, he can catch passes, and he just averages over 4 yards a carry in his career. In fact, he averages 4.6 yards per carry over his 5-year career, well above average. So the Giants gave Singletary this nice contract, $9.5 million guaranteed after Saquon Barkley left in free agency, and they didn't really add anybody else. As far as free agency goes, they added nobody, and the only guy they took in the draft was a 5th rounder in Tyron Tracy, who I do think is appealing. He's a dynamic player. He transitioned from wide receiver to running back. He's great with the ball in his hands, was great in the Big Ten last year, but he's still a 5th round pick, no NFL experience. Other than that, Eric Gray, who only had like 2 touches last year, I believe, as his rookie, or maybe what was it exactly? Let's see here. Correction, it was 1 carry per game he had, so nothing crazy, 17 total carries, so he really isn't proven or showing that he can get on the field. And then there's Gary Brightwell, who's had like 40-something career carries, and since then they've only drafted Eric Gray and Tyron Tracy, so I don't think they believe much in Gary Brightwell. So with all this context added in, it's surprising to see Devin Singletary going as the running back 35 around guys like Gus Edwards, around backup running backs like Chase Brown. Even though I like these guys, Chase Brown and Brian Robinson, ahead of him, Devin Singletary has nowhere near the same amount of competition. Now, one big issue is the Giants' offensive line. It ranked 30th last year in run blocking. They dealt with some injuries and just poor production overall. But they have attempted to fix this, at least in free agency. They signed offensive lineman John Runyon from the Packers. Last 3 seasons, he started 50 of 51 games. And then the former Patriot and Raider, Jermaine Illuminor, who's also probably immediately going to be a starting offensive lineman for this team. So they're trying to patch it up a little bit. And not to mention their big piece, their left tackle, Andrew Thomas, was hurt for most of last year, so getting him back should help. And if they can get anything out of Evan Neal, a former top 10 overall pick, just anything out of Evan Neal this year, which they probably won't, well, that'll help a lot as well. So these are 6 running backs who I believe deserve a lot more attention in fantasy football, and that based on where they're currently going in underdog drafts, sleeper drafts, whatever it might be, I personally really do enjoy taking them. But if you want to see the 5 guys across any position who, based on these offseason moves for all teams, free agency and the draft, are rising up a ton, well, it's these 5 guys in this video right here. And hey, if you're not already subscribed, be sure to hit the subscribe button on this channel.